Ever get that feeling when you're trying to wrap your head around something new and it's just like a flood of information?
Yeah, totally. Like wading through a jungle.
Exactly. You just want the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
The key bits, without getting totally lost.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's exactly what we're doing today on the deep dive. We've taken this fascinating stack of material all about Siddhartha Gautama. You probably know him as the Buddha. And we've basically pulled out the essential story for you.
Think of it as um, your guided tour through the life and foundational story of Siddhartha. We've looked at historical accounts, biographical details, different interpretations.
Right.
Our goal is really just to give you a clear grasp of the pivotal moments, the core ideas surrounding this, well, incredibly influential figure, without burying you in every single detail.
Okay, sounds good. So where does this incredible story kick off?
It starts around 624 BCE
Uh-huh.
in Lumbini. That's in modern-day Nepal.
Okay.
Siddhartha's father, King Siddhartha, he was the leader of the Shakya clan, and his mother, Queen Maya, she was from the neighboring Koli kingdom.
And right from the get-go, it sounds like there were some pretty significant predictions about his future.
Absolutely. One of the most famous is the prophecy by the sage Asita.
Ah, yes.
He foresaw that young Siddhartha would become either a Chakravartin, which is basically a great, righteous, universal ruler.
A world leader type.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Or the alternative was he'd become a profound spiritual leader. And this prediction even included this, like, striking image. A footprint marked with a wheel and 32 distinct symbols.
Wow, 32 marks. Talk about a sign right from the start. And the signs didn't stop there, did they? There was also Queen Maya's dream, something about a white elephant.
That's right. A white elephant entering her right side. So the Brahmin priests, they interpreted this dream as meaning she'd conceived a holy child.
Okay.
And again, this dual destiny idea came up.
Mm-hmm.
Either the Chakravartin, the ruler, or an enlightened being.
Fascinating. And the birth itself in Lumbini.
Yeah, it happened while Maya was traveling. The story goes she gave birth holding onto a solid tree. And even right at birth, Siddhartha was said to have these 32 auspicious markings. It really sets him apart in the traditional accounts.
So from these extraordinary beginnings, he was raised in, well, extreme luxury, right? It sounds like his dad was really banking on him becoming that great king.
Precisely. King Siddhartha, well, he went to great lengths, apparently, to shield his son from any exposure to suffering.
Like totally bubble wrapped him.
Pretty much. He was raised in total opulence. There are accounts mentioning 3 separate palaces, tailored to the different seasons, spring, autumn, winter. The whole idea was just keep him focused on worldly power.
A gilded cage, kind of. And part of keeping him on that path involved marriage pretty young, right? To Princess Yashavara.
Yes, at 16, she was also from the Koli clan. But what's interesting is that their early married life is often described as, well, initially chaste, focused on meditation.
Really? Not the typical royal marriage, then?
Not entirely, it seems. It wasn't solely about producing heirs right away. It's just maybe a different inclination even then.
So even inside this sheltered, privileged bubble, there were hints. But then come the moments that really blew it all open, the foresights. Tell us about those.
Right. These were encounters Siddhartha had outside the palace walls, despite his father's best efforts. He saw an old man, a sick person, a corpse, and finally, a renunciant. Someone who'd given up worldly life for spiritual truth.
And these weren't just like passing glances.
No, not at all. It was a direct confrontation with the reality of suffering old age, sickness, death, things he'd been totally shielded from. And then seeing the renunciant offered a glimpse of maybe another way, it really hit home the unsatisfactory nature of just worldly happiness.
And some sources say these weren't even accidental.
Yeah, some traditions believe they were divinely arranged, almost like nudges to get him onto his destined path.
These encounters must have been a huge shock, especially for someone so sheltered. And this leads us towards a really massive turning point, the Great Renunciation. But just before that, his son, Rahula, was born. The name itself seems significant.
It does. Rahula can be translated as impediment or fetter.
Wow.
Which seems to reflect Siddhartha's growing feeling that these worldly ties, even family, were holding him back from his search. His son's birth might have actually been the final catalyst.
So that solidified his decision.
It seems so. He decided to leave the palace at age 29. The traditional story is quite dramatic, leaving in the dead of night with just his charioteer, Chana, and his horse, Kantaka.
Imagine the weight of that, leaving literally everything behind. And when they reach the Anoma River, more symbolic stuff happens there.
Absolutely. At the riverbank, he takes off his royal clothes, his jewels basically shedding his old identity. He cuts off his hair, which legend says was caught by the god Indra and taken up to a heaven. Even his horse, Kanthaka, is said to have died of grief right there, later being reborn in a heavenly realm. Powerful symbols of letting go.
So now he's fully committed to this new path, seeking answers. Who did he learn from initially?
He sought out various spiritual teachers of the time. First, there was Alara Kalama. He learned to reach a state of nothingness from him.
Okay.
Then he studied with Uddaka Ramaputa and achieved an even subtler state, neither perception nor non-perception.
That's pretty advanced.
Extremely high levels of meditation, yes. But ultimately, Siddhartha felt these states, while peaceful, weren't the final answer. They didn't lead to complete liberation from suffering.
So the search continued, and this led him into a period of really intense asceticism, like the complete opposite of his palace life.
Exactly. For 6 years, he practiced extreme self-denial with 5 companions. The descriptions are quite graphic: emaciated, starving, pushing his body to the absolute limit.
Trying to conquer suffering through hardship.
That was the idea, yeah. But it didn't work. In fact, it almost killed him. And he realized that weakening the body so much actually clouded the mind. It wasn't leading to insight.
And he remembered something from his childhood.
Yes, a key memory surfaced. He recalled sitting under a jambu tree as a boy and naturally entering this state of peaceful, meditative bliss. It was effortless, not forced like the austerities. It suggested a different way, a more balanced path.
Ah, so that memory was crucial. He then makes a total shift, abandons the extreme stuff.
Totally. He realized weakening himself wasn't the way. He accepted an offering of milk rice from a village woman named Sujata.
And that was significant.
Hugely significant. It marked the end of the harsh asceticism and, you could say, the beginning of the middle way. He'd later teach avoiding both extreme indulgence and extreme denial.
Right, finding that balance.
Exactly. So, nourished, regaining his strength, he traveled to Bodh Gaya. He sat down under a fig tree, what we now call the Bodhi tree.
The famous Bodhi tree.
That's the one. And he made this powerful resolution. He would not get up until he attained full enlightenment. A grass cutter named Sothia apparently gave him some kusha grass for his meditation seat.
The sheer determination, it's incredible. And it's under this tree that he faces, like the ultimate test, the temptations of Mara. Who exactly is Mara?
Mara is often personified as the embodiment of temptation, illusion, death, basically everything that keeps us trapped in the cycle of suffering and rebirth.
Like the ultimate adversary.
In a sense, yeah. The accounts say Mara attacked Siddhartha with armies of fears and desires. He even sent his own daughters their names translate to things like craving, discontent, and lust to distract him.
Trying every trick in the book.
Pretty much. But Siddhartha remained completely unmoved, deep in meditation.
And then during that night, the breakthrough happens.
Yes. It's traditionally described as happening in 3 watches of the night. First watch. He gained knowledge of all his past lives.
Wow.
Second watch. He understood the whole cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. How karma, our actions, shapes our experiences across lifetimes.
Cause and effect on a cosmic scale.
You got it. And then, the third watch. He realized the 4 Noble Truths. These are the absolute core of his teaching the truth of suffering, its cause, the possibility of its end, and the path to end it.
And that was it. Enlightenment.
That was it. At age 35, around 589 BCE, he became the Buddha, the awakened one.
The moment of enlightenment. But I heard his first thought wasn't actually to rush out and teach everyone.
That's a really crucial point. He did hesitate. He felt the truth, the Dharma, was so profound, so subtle maybe. Maybe ordinary people just wouldn't get it.
Understandable, I guess.
But the story continues that Brahma Sanhampati, a high deity, appeared and basically pleaded with him. He urged him to teach out of compassion, saying there were beings who could understand, who just needed to hear it.
And that appeal worked.
It did. It moved the Buddha to share his realization. And from then on, he was also known as Shakyamuni, the sage of the Shakyas, his clan.
Okay, so the teaching begins. And his very first disciples were kind of unexpected.
Yeah, 2 merchants, Trapusa and Balika. They just happened to pass by shortly after his enlightenment and offered him food.
Just like that.
Just like that. They became the first lay followers. Upasakas taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma, his teaching. They even received some hair relics from him. And there's a tradition connecting them to the later flourishing of Buddhism in Myanmar.
Wow. And then he sought out his old friends, the ascetics.
Yes, he knew they were serious seekers. He traveled to Sarnath, to the deer park near Varanasi, found the 5 men he'd practiced austerities with.
Must have been an interesting reunion.
I imagine. And it was there he delivered his first formal sermon. He taught them the middle way, that path between extremes, and explained the Four Noble Truths.
And they became...
They became the first 5 monks, the first bhikkhus. This was the beginning of the Sangha, the monastic community.
And the Sangha grew. It eventually included nuns too, right? Though that wasn't straightforward.
No, it wasn't. The Buddha initially resisted establishing an order for women, the bhikkhunis.
Why was that?
The texts don't give one simple reason, but societal norms of the time likely played a big role. It said his disciple, Ananda, the one known for his amazing memory, kept pleading on behalf of the women, including the Buddha's own stepmother.
And he eventually agreed.
He did, but he laid down stricter rules for the nuns. And there's a somewhat controversial prediction attributed to him that allowing the nuns' order would mean the Dharma, the teachings, wouldn't last as long in their pure form.
Interesting. And the Sangha also included lay people.
Absolutely. Laymen, upasakas, and laywomen, upasikas, were crucial from the start, supporting the monks and nuns.
And as this community grew, certain key figures emerged.
Definitely. You hear about his top disciples, like Sariputta, who was foremost in wisdom, and Moggallana, known for his psychic abilities.
Psychic abilities.
Yeah, supernatural powers attained through meditation, things like levitation, reading minds. It's part of the traditional accounts. And of course, Ananda, who was his cousin and attendant, remembered all the sermons. He's even credited with suggesting the design for the simple monastic robe.
And powerful supporters too, kings and merchants.
Right. People like King Bimbisara of Magadha, who donated the first monastery, Valuvana, the bamboo grove, and Anathapindika, a wealthy merchant who donated the famous Jetavana monastery. These were vital centers.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? There was opposition. The story of Devadatta, his cousin.
Yes, Devadatta is portrayed as a major antagonist. He apparently became jealous, tried to usurp leadership, even made attempts on the Buddha's life, and tried to cause a schism, a split in the Sangha.
So internal conflict too.
It shows the challenges involved. But despite all this, the Buddha just kept teaching for 45 years, traveling all over the Ganges plain in India.
And throughout all that teaching, he maintained a certain perspective on his own message, not setting himself up as the only way.
Yeah. Exactly. He famously used the analogy of his teachings being like a finger pointing to the moon.
Ah, don't mistake the finger for the moon.
Precisely. The teachings are a guide, a raft to cross the river, not the destination itself. He always stressed individual effort. You have to do the work, practice the path. It wasn't about blind faith in him.
And then, after all those years, he reached the end of his life at 80.
Yes, around 544 BCE, in a place called Kushinagar. He predicted his own death, his parinirvana, or final blowing out, 3 months in advance.
And the story about his last meal. Offered by Kunda the blacksmith, there's some debate about that.
There is. Some later interpretations speculated the food might have been spoiled pork or mushrooms that caused his death. But the earlier texts have the Buddha himself clearing Kunda of any blame, saying the offering was highly meritorious, and attributing his passing to his age and perhaps remaining karmic effects.
Okay. And his final words are quite famous, aren't they?
Very much so. All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. A powerful final reminder. Then, he's said to have passed away peacefully, moving through progressively deeper meditative states into nirvana. His disciple Anuruddha gave a eulogy, and there are accounts of miracles at his cremation flowers raining down, the pyre refusing to light until another major disciple, Mahakassapa, arrived.
And after the cremation, what happened to his physical remains, the relics?
This is another fascinating part of the story. The relics were divided, apparently quite contentiously at first, among 8 different kingdoms or clans, plus the Brahmin who did the dividing, and they were enshrined in burial mounds called stupas.
So spread out quite widely.
Yes, and centuries later, the Emperor Ashoka, who converted to Buddhism, supposedly gathered many of these relics, divided them further, and built thousands more stupas across India and beyond. He was hugely instrumental in spreading Buddhism.
And we actually have archaeological evidence for this.
Remarkably, yes. The discovery of a relic casket at Piprawa in the late 19th century, with inscriptions mentioning the Shakyas, seems to confirm the ancient accounts of the initial division of relics. It's quite amazing.
That really brings history to life. And of course, the most important legacy, the teachings themselves. How were they preserved?
Crucially, soon after his death, the first Buddhist council was held at Rajagriha. Senior disciples like Mahakassapa, Upali, who knew the monastic rules, and Ananda recited the Buddha's sermons, sutras, and the monastic discipline, Vinaya, from memory. This formed the basis of the Pali Canon, the earliest collection of Buddhist scriptures.
Preserving the Dharma for the future.
Exactly. And over time, key places associated with his life became major pilgrimage sites for Buddhists everywhere.
We mentioned some already: Bodh Gaya.
Gold Guy for enlightenment, yes. Kushinagar for his parinirvana. Lumbini, his birthplace, where Ashoka later erected a pillar that was rediscovered. And Sarnath for the first sermon. Even the Bodhi tree itself has a lineage. Cuttings were taken and planted elsewhere, like in Sri Lanka, and are revered today.
And how was the Buddha actually depicted? We see so many statues, but what did the text say about his appearance?
Well, the texts mention those 32 major marks of a great man, Mahapurusha, which are symbolic physical characteristics. Things like long earlobes, a bump on the head, Ushnisha, wheel patterns on his feet. These signified his spiritual status. Art often portrays him with serene, idealized features.
But he emphasized looking beyond the physical.
Absolutely. He famously said something like, "He who sees the Dharma sees me." The real understanding comes from grasping the teachings, not just admiring his form. And, of course, depictions usually show his shaven head, the mark of a renunciant who has left worldly life behind.
It's also really interesting how his story and teachings have influenced and been interpreted by other traditions over the centuries.
Oh, immensely. Within Hinduism, for instance, there's a tradition, though not universally accepted, that views the Buddha as the ninth avatar of Vishnu, sometimes seen as a way to absorb Buddhism back into the Hindu fold.
Right.
He's also considered a prophet in the Ahmadiyya movement within Islam. Early Chinese Buddhists sometimes saw him as a manifestation of Lao Tzu. His story even influenced Christian legend through the tale of Barlaam and Josaphat, which is basically a Christianized version of the Buddha's life. And of course, countless works of art, literature like Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, and films.
Like Little Buddha.
Exactly. His story resonates across cultures.
And finally, he's known by many titles or epithets, right? You mentioned Shakyamuni, but there are others. Dashabala, Tathagata.
Yes, the 10 powers, or epithets. Tathagata is a really important one. It means something like, thus come one, or thus gone one, someone who embodies the ultimate reality.
Okay.
Arhat means a worthy one, someone completely free from defilements. And Samyak Sambuddha means perfectly self-enlightened one, emphasizing that he discovered the path himself without a teacher in that final lifetime. These titles highlight different aspects of his achievement.
So wrapping this up, we've traced this incredible journey. From a prince surrounded by luxury, deliberately kept from suffering, to someone who confronts that suffering head-on, renounces everything, endures extreme hardship, finds enlightenment,
and then spends 45 years teaching a path, the middle way, showing others how they too might end suffering.
The impact has just been enormous, spanning millennia and continents.
Absolutely. And hopefully, by exploring these sources with us, you now have, a solid feel for this really pivotal figure and the foundations of his thought.
And maybe something to consider. In our own lives today, with all our own stresses and, let's face it, our own kinds of suffering and dissatisfaction, what can we take from Siddhartha's journey? His radical choice to leave comfort behind to find deeper meaning. It still prompts questions, doesn't it, about what truly matters.
It really does. It's a timeless quest for understanding and inner peace.
We really encourage you, if something sparked your interest, maybe the Four Noble Truths, maybe the history of how Buddhism spread, or those amazing pilgrimage sites, to dive deeper. There's so much more to explore.
Definitely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.